Recording and studying. It's going in.
Somebody asked a question?
Not yet.
Did you invite them to ask the question?
What?
Did you invite them to ask the question?
I did.
Oh,
I thought I did.
Okay.
yeah. It's,
Go ahead. I don't know if it's a good question or not, but I'll ask it anyway.
We'll be the judge.
I'm wondering about the titles. If they have any significance, and the titles of the parashios. Sometimes they seem to be, very arbitrarily the first word, like Miketz. I would think it better, often it's not the first word, like Ela told us it's the second word, or Ela told us no, the third. So Miketz, ideally, I would think it would be like Vahim Miketz, Shnasai B'nei Paro Choles, maybe Parshas Paro, Parshas Chalom. Miketz just means, a go. So it doesn't seem very meaningful. A lot of parshas are like that. The name of parsha seemingly doesn't seem to be very significant. So I was curious to know about the significance of that. Perhaps there is a significance in some easy way. Alternatively, we had a question 2 days ago that never got answered. I'm just looking at my notes here that someone asked about the Spiros, why Yosef is out of order. As opposed to being, as far as chronologically, I think it was Chaim's question. Why Yosef is after Rosh Hashanah?
Why he's after?
Why Yosef is after Rosh Hashanah when he lived earlier than Rosh Hashanah. So, if my question requires more thought, that's another question we have left over from 2 days ago.
Which was the other one?
My question was about the name of the parashiyos. And 2 days ago, someone asked about the Shkut Harisab, which we ended up dealing with, but then while we was thinking, someone else asked about the Spheros, why Yosef is later in the Spheros after Rosh Hashanah. So that's option B, to go back to that from 2 days ago.
Option C is the Rebbe's discretion.
Another one about Ishtadlus and Emunah. Bringing in terms of money, giving out, earning money for today, for tomorrow, for this. We hear all Chazal about just going out for today. How's that? How do we do it? Not do it. Should we work? We have there's a recession coming, so we should just bring in as much money as we can forever. How do we work with that?
That's the hardest one of all. Good question.
Calibrating status.
Like they say by Yosef, the fact that he said, "Remember me," the extra 2 words, he had to, for his level of emunah, that level of ishtadlus. So it's like an inverse relationship between how much ishtadlus and how much bitachon and emunah.
The part of that answer is dependent on how real the person is about where he's holding. So, if a person's unrealistic about his, how how much he believes that the Rabbi Shalom is going to respond to his trust. So it's not going to happen. You know, it has to be consistent with where they're really at. So someone who very profoundly and absolutely believes that the Rabbi Shalom is going to take care of him is going to be able to do a whole lot less. Thank you, Chaim.
The person's going to be able to do a lot less.
The person will be able to do a lot less because he really believes that. And a person who is in any which way unrealistic or pretentious about it and wants to act that way when he's not really, he doesn't really believe that. He believes that he has to do more. It's not going to work. Somebody asked me, we live in a integrated neighborhood in Milwaukee, and Baruch Hashem, we haven't had any. Our community has not suffered from any serious crime there. If you leave stuff out, bicycles and stuff, or if you leave your garage door open, they'll come steal your power lawnmower. But so there are thefts, and on rare occasion there's a car theft. But in as much as it is an integrated neighborhood, the Afro-American community amongst themselves are guilty of committing crimes against themselves. So there's a lot of family violence and stuff. So it's not unusual that people will hear at one time or another gunshots. So, I've said about that I really don't, I don't feel terribly unsafe in my neighborhood. But when the Arabs were working here, I felt unsafe because they hate us. The Afro-Americans don't hate us. They're like, they don't have a sense of boundaries. So there's an entitlement attitude which allows them to commit theft, and on occasion to threaten. But it's not because they hate Jews. They don't hate Jews. They just have a general attitude which is one that lacks any sense of boundaries. So somebody asked me about whether they should have a gun in their house. So I said to him, "Tell me how unsafe you feel." So he said, "Well, is it a problem in bitachon?" I said to him, "You lock your door at night." He said, "Of course." I said, "Well, why do you lock your door?" So he said, "Because I don't feel safe." So I said to him, so that tells you something about where your level of trust is. I mean, if you really had this absolutely sensational trust, you would probably leave your door open. But you say, I don't have a right to that level of trust because we have this week's parsha, Asad and Mikatrig v'shas sakona, that Yaakov Avinu did not want to send Binyamin because traveling is safe. I mean, the Rashi quotes the Chazal, says, well, and if something was supposed to happen, it could happen in your house also. But no, the derech is a makim sakona. So when you travel, you're in a certain sense you're exposing yourself to more the possibility of danger. So it changes the equation in heaven. It changes the way in which your file is reviewed. But But the issue, so I said to him, I said, you know, if you tell me that you feel that unsafe, that you need to feel that you've got some additional protection, then, you know, getting a gun is not chisar and bitachon. That's where you're holding. Somebody who, you know, it's a, we have this peculiar institution of an Eved Ivri. So an Eved Ivri could be someone who is sold into Avdus because of a theft which he can't repay, or it could be someone who is destitute and feels that they need to sell themselves into a situation where they can pay their bills. So after 6 years of servitude, so he's supposed to go free, but the Torah offers him an option. At the end of 6 years, Im Omer Yemar Eved, if the Eved will say, Havti Asadoni Ves Ishti Ves Bonai Leitze Chavshi, I like the wife that I have here, the Shivcha Kanani, as Bonai and his children, I don't want to go free. So then he goes through this ritual with his ear gets bored. There's I'm trying to remember who says it. I think it's one of the Brisker Teras, that when Moshe Rabbeinu is pleading with Hashem, Parshas V'eschanan, to go free, so Hashem says to him, Davlach, Al Tesav L'daber Imi Oid, Don't talk to me anymore about this. So one of the, I think it was one of the Brisker, said that Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, Ahavti as Ishti ves Bonai, that refers to the Shechina as Ishti and Klal Yisrael as Bonai. So, Le'etzei Chavshi, I don't want to die. So, Le'etzei Chavshi, I don't want to die. So the halacha is that when it comes to this particular stage, the Eved has to repeat himself. He has to say, Ahavti as Ishti, as Bonai, Ahavti as Adoini, as Ishti as Bonai, Le'etzei Chavshi, I don't want to go out. So he has to repeat that twice, because it says Im Amir Yaimar. It repeats the word Amira twice. So
what does he repeat?
Huh?
What does he repeat?
He has to say Ahavti es Adoini es Ishti Vesboni. He has to repeat that. It's the Le'etzei Chavshi. I don't want to go for yes. That sentence.
Two times.
Right, he has said twice, because it says Im Amir Yaimar. So he said this already when by Veschanan. He said it once, and when Shamsul Ravlach. Don't say it a second time, because I'm going to have to let you out. I'm going to have to give in to you, because Rabbi Michel keeps the halacha. So when he said this, don't say it again. And anyway, so it's such a, we view that as a very peculiar thing for a person to say. What kind of person would say it? I want to stay and I want to be an Eved. But when we step back a little bit and we say, what's going on here? Here's somebody who was destitute, didn't have any medical insurance, was not real comfortable about the fact that he's going to have a roof over his head, that he's going to be able to pay his mortgage. He's worried about the fact that his family is going to be evicted. He has a tough time finding a job. Nobody wants to hire him. So he goes into servitude. Now, all of his responsibilities are on the other. The other has to take care and make sure that his wife and children are cared for. He has to make sure that they have parnosa, that he's assured at least for 6 years that he has a job, and when he goes out, he's going to have a little bit of a pension because there's a din of Hanukkah. So, if at the end of that period of time, a person says, you know what, I feel secure. I have job security. I have, my family's being cared for. I want to stay here. So when people find themselves in a position where they have a job and they have job security, so even though if you were to kind of put this person into a place where you would probe about their priorities and their values. So ask anybody who's a Torah person, what's the most important thing in the world to you? Serving Hashem. And what's your priority in terms of serving Hashem? Learning and davening. But then you say to them, so how are your priorities reflected in your day-to-day life? And there's not much going on there because, what can I do? I have to provide for my family, and some people travel hours every day back and forth from work, and what's left? They come home and they're wiped out. They're fatigued. They don't have any energy left. Even if they could go to a shiur, their minds are elsewhere. So there's so much of maybe the majority of us who, when push comes to shove, our lives do not reflect our priorities. So the issue of bitachon is really a very, very crucial issue. How much is a person willing to put on the line in order to be able to live in a manner which is consistent with their values? And if you say to them, why don't you find a job where you'll instead of 8 hours, you'll work 5 hours a day, you'll have 3 hours, you'll have available. Yeah, but it won't be enough. There's some very, very painful decisions that have to be made in terms of, what we're willing to risk and what things we're willing to give up. So the bottom line of the equation of hishtadlus and bitachon is that in direct correspondence to how much bitachon a person really has, how invested he is in his priorities, and how much he's willing to give up authentically and not be resentful and bitter about it. That's the level of hishtadlus that he can entertain.
How do you honestly do that? That's the first question. And then secondly, we're part of a bigger system, namely our wives. We're all at different levels
Right.
than our wives by definition, because we're
Right.
different people.
And frankly, I believe that, and I'm sorry this is being recorded, but I believe that some of our leadership is out to lunch. We have today kollel couples where they've been, the wives have been indoctrinated in the Beis Yaakov seminaries that they should want to only marry somebody who's going to learn forever. And the bochrim get married, and you say to them, well, what are you going to do 5 years from now when you have 3 children? And the story about the father of a young lady who's dating somebody in the yeshiva, and he goes to interview the prospective groom. So he says to him, you want to marry my daughter? How would you support her? Well, I'm going to learn the kollel, and the kollel is going to pay me, and my wife is going to work. Okay, so what happens after a few years, and you have a few children, and we'll get somebody to care for the children. My wife will continue to work, and what'll happen when your wife can't work anymore, and so God will provide. Well, okay, so you're going to sit and learn, and then it gets kind of tight in the house, and you don't have enough money. What do you do? God will provide. What happens when your wife tells you that she can't live that way? God will provide. So he comes home, and his wife says to him, so how did the interview go? He said, it went very well. So what is he all about? He says, well, he thinks very highly of me. He thinks I'm God. It's unfair. There are therapists and doctors, mostly therapists, think that the whole world suffers from the kinds of things the kind of problems that just. What do therapists and rabbis hear? They hear about problems. So we tend to generalize, but we do hear a lot about families that are falling apart because the stresses of finances are making shalom bayis. It's a terrible, terrible stress on the marriage, and and then when they have 4 or 5 kids, then they're going to go figure out what they're going to do. And how they're going to, so they have to learn something then, and it takes years for them to, so there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the picture of putting families who, in theory, they've both been told that this is the way to go, but the theory doesn't take into account the fact that these young people are not, that's not really where they're at. They can handle being bali b'tochen as long as things don't get too hot, but it breaks down. They're not the Reb Zisha. They're not, they're not these people who can really live that way. So.
I'll take it further. I don't know if there's anyone here who's in that bracket. I'm sure some of our kids might want to be in that bracket, or be in schools that are kind of pushing that way. But even for most of our, even even for us working people, it's still a struggle. It's still, you know, at least I see conservatives, I think almost everyone I know is struggling with this balance of how to make ends meet and still have a life and still, you know, where does betachon come into that?
So, you know, that's where Bechira comes in, and that's why God didn't promise us a rose garden. It's those are the kinds of decisions that define us. Those are the very agonizing forks in the road that, in a certain sense, either they choose us or we choose them. It's a question of, you know, who's doing the choosing. I certainly don't think that anybody has the right to sit in judgment on you know, the Gemara says, "Habe also kirb shemen v'yolsu biyodam." What? V'yolsu biyodam. It didn't work. It doesn't work. The people tried, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because they're not like Reb Shimon. V'yisi b'nei aliyah v'hem u'motim. B'nei aliyah are few and far between. So the rest of us who are not b'nei aliyah need to be real. And we need to acknowledge how, you know, where our boundaries are, how far we genuinely believe, what we can live with, live without. You know, there's some people who really can live without a lot of the amenities, and they're perfectly happy without them. And there are some who can't.
I was just going to say that I think that, you know, particularly when we look at Yosef and he asks the Saramashke to remember him, we also have to remember in our own times that there is a social fabric that changes constantly all the time. So, for example, if you look at the Hasidic diamond trade, transactions happen there far quicker because there's a social fabric that's in place that doesn't rely upon necessarily legalities and lawmakers to have to come in and sign contracts. There's almost a handshake works. Whereas you see processes like that with the same maybe financial amounts take much longer in other businesses because social fabric has changed. So I think that when we look at our own bitachon and how we measure that for ourselves, we also have to consider the environment around us. You're living in an integrated neighborhood. It might be, you know, meshuggah to not close your door. Aren't you asking for trouble, is what I'm saying. Like, there's an element of Yehora in a sense, you know, like walking around the tefillin on you. Who used to think that you put yourself in a situation that the social fabric says the likelihood will be you will come against some kind of danger, then the bitachon is crazy to think Hashem's going to protect me all the time. And I think that's where we struggle with. And we like to think to ourselves, because we read Arskol, Sifrei, Bitachon, Emunah, that tells us that everything's a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and it's not that, it's not that. But I think what it's doing is it's filtering out the common sense that needs to be in place first and foremost, you know. And I think that's the biggest struggle. So like when we look at Yosef, how can we clearly, because he stayed 2 years in prison, he was beyond that. But for you and me, you know, were we to be in prison, saying to the Sarah Mashke, remember us, might have been the right decision.
Well, that would be the right decision for us.
Can I add a detail? I mean, we're discussing bitachon in the context of economic realities. So it almost seems that this economic stress is a design of the Kodesh Baruch Hu, because it's just, you know, if I look ahead for my kids who are teens, and, you know, teens that are now saying, okay, which direction should I take in life? You know, I look ahead and I say, well, you know, 30% of the jobs that we see now are going to evaporate. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's not going to be taxi drivers, and there's not going to be, you know, this field, and there's not going to be that field, and Kodesh Baruch Hu's taking more out of the game. Maybe there's more coming in, but you try and put your head into, okay, so where should everyone become a programmer, or should how do you just that's Ishtadlus. You want to decide for your children, but the thing's being taken out of the game. It's like
there was a speaker who got up once. We had this once. It was a speaker who came to Milwaukee, and he got up, and the first thing he said was, "Where is that kid? I want to kill him." And it was a great opening line. Now everybody was like sitting on the edge of their seats. So he said, go back thousands of years. He says, so there were these parents, they had this child, they had a child, so the father's busy working 24 hours a day, and they said to him, why are you working 24 hours a day? Why don't you spend some time learning, davening, enjoying it. Can't, I gotta provide for my child. Gotta make sure he's gonna have a good future. So this, whoever this angel is who asked the question comes back 20 years later, and there's this child, and he's working very hard. He says to him, why are you working so hard? He said, I gotta provide for my child. I gotta make sure he's got a future, so I gotta... Angel keeps coming back, and meanwhile, thousands of years, nobody has a life, but they're working for this child. So he said, where is this child that all of history is working for? I want to find him and kill him. He's destroyed the quality of everybody's life, and everybody's working for it. Where is this kid? I want to kill him. Yeah. Once upon a time, it was much simpler because in our time, the world changes in months. Once upon a time, it took a century to change. 50 years ago, I eulogized a man who was 112 years old. So that means 162 years. So at the eulogy, I said, I want everybody for us to think of the transition that transpired in this man's life, how he had to adjust to change. Now, he was born, like I think during the Civil War, and then there, when there were horses and wagons, then now there's cars, and then there's it's just a massive amount of change. But just think of the massive amount of change that we've gone through. When I was a kid, there was this comic strip, Dick Tracy, and he had this watch that he spoke to. And that to us was science fiction. Now I'm Dick Tracy. So it's hard to project into the future what we could do for our kids to provide for them. But some of the things that have happened today that are a step ahead is that there are many things that people can qualify for without going into an environment which is toxic. Most of the secular universities today are pretty much a war zone. A moral war zone. The social
Graveyard is probably better.
Graveyard. The social pressures are astronomical. Whether it's promiscuity or it's alcohol abuse or drug use. Everybody in the world is on marijuana. It's not even I don't think anybody considers it anymore as something that's,
Deviant.
huh?
Deviant.
Deviant. But it destroys people's lives. I was dealing recently with a couple who are having just a terrible, terrible time because the husband is on marijuana. He doesn't realize how it's, his use of marijuana has been increasing. He's becoming increasingly more abusive. He's already been on detox once. Recidivism and drug abuses and alcohol abuses, something like 80%. More?
What, somebody who has relapse?
Yeah, recidivism, they go back into.
Are you describing misplaced ishtatus?
Well, one of the things was mentioned here before, I think Ellie said it, is that misplaced ishtadlus is when you're trying to be a big tzaddik, but the rest of your family is suffering because they're not positioned to accept the conditions that you're willing to live with. When I was in Lakewood, going back now, 60 years ago, there was a family where there was a family of about 4 or 5 children, and he refused to accept any charity at all, and the kollel paid peanuts, but he wouldn't. So some of the other Yungalite would go buy cans of food, and they would take a hammer and they would damage. They dent the cans, and then they would take these cans over to this family, and would say to the store sold this to us because they were damaged at a fraction of the price because he wanted to pay for everything. So they managed to, but the poverty was frightening. And I learned later on, because I asked, about 10 years after I had left Lakewood, I inquired about this family. He told me that most of the children went off. They went off to derech. It wasn't, he made a decision for the family, which was not acceptable. And there's another interesting thing. Even if the children don't go off, but their values get affected, because when there's an economic stress in the house and they're forced to do without where their friends are enjoying good stuff, they're somehow resolved that they're not going to live that way. So instead of being able to somehow maybe entertain going into any of the things that of learning, they don't go into learning. Their lives are dominated by making money.
So it was a mistake.
What?
It was a mistake. He thought he was doing something good. I mean, he thought
Right.
he was, teaching
Right.
them that there's higher purposes and things, but he.
Well, so it depends how it's.
That
It
he was doing, or that.
It depends how it's done. Everybody has to be on the same page. If they're not on the same page, so that's what Eli was suggesting earlier. That it's not just the person's ishtadlus for himself, but it has to work for.
So when you grew up and you just have the buttons handy, you were on the same page as your parents. But if you felt
that was.
and have to have them, so what would you do if you're not on the same page?
Yeah, I don't know if I would have had to make a decision for my life at the point when I was 9 years old, but after going into the yeshiva and finding sipuk hanefesh, that was no longer really a trade-off. I mean, there wasn't a consideration that I would want to give up a life of spiritual pursuit for the button candy.
Maybe because you had it early enough on that you, if those kids would have been in Mea Shearim or whatever, and they would have been surrounded by the same Sviva, so it would have had the same actions that you took would probably have a different reaction, a different result. They might have grown up to eat tzaddikim, right? Your friends are also in the same situation. That's what you're saying with social life.
As long as there was izun in the house.
In the house and outside the house.
Your external environment might be the same as what you experience, but in the house there might be one partner or the other partner who feels chasser. And then the message.
If there's bitterness and resentment, it's gonna. They tell a story. It's a very peculiar story. They tell a story about there's a Lecheva Magid. My children are Lecheva Eniklach. Michel is Lecheva. He was a Talmud Chadar of the Baal Shem Tov. So they say that, and he had 5 sons who were, they were all skyscrapers. They were like really big tzaddikim, all of them. Anyway, so they said that one of his kids, the little kid, and he came over to him and said to him, Tati, I'm hungry. So he said, well, go ask your mom for some food. So he says, I did. Mom said, there's no food in the house. So he said to him, well, then you're not hungry. So he said, but I am hungry. He said, well, if there's no food in the house, you're not hungry. So he started to cry. And the Lechema Magid, like, you know, he was bothered by it. And he looked down and under the table where he was learning, he saw there was a coin that was covered by dust. And he bent down, he picked up the coin, he said, oh, I guess you were hungry. And the fact that he found the coin, which could buy food, was the indication that the reality really was that he was hungry, because if he didn't have the...
That's a madrega.
Huh?
That's a madrega, wow.
That's a madrega, you know. Oh, I guess you really were hungry.
You know, it's interesting. We know personally a number of people who do kiruv with large families, and almost all their kids are off the derech. You ever see that kind of phenomenon?
The cure of people's
the cure of people,
their family.
And their own children.
You think what they do shtadlos for other people, but they're not.
Because they're trying to bring other, you know, and then with their own kids somehow, or something gets lost.
They get
I've
lost.
seen it in a number of cases, and it's almost, I don't know if it's a phenomenon or it just happens to be some people we know and they were ineffective at dealing with their own children, but yet they were good with others.
I don't see it as a pattern, but I'm aware of the fact that it does happen. That, you know, like there's a Yiddish expression, "Aschistas Kinder gehen Bildes." Huh? Schneider's Kinder gehen naked, which is a shoemaker's children go barefoot, and a tailor's children go naked.
We didn't get to use